Want to welcome in Dylan Buboltz, my guest this week on the podcast from Wisconsin Sports Heroics, wisportsheroics.com. Dylan covers the Badgers, and safe to say, Dylan, you've had a very busy week. What's been the reaction to the Paul Chryst firing from your end?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, the overall consensus vibes that I've gotten over the past 48 hours or 72 hours or so, a lot of people have kind of been on the same opinion in that everyone was shocked by the firing. I know I was shocked by the firing of Paul Chryst. Um, the fact that this was done mid-season, not at the end of the season, this was never really the Wisconsin way to let
Yes.
a coach go right in the middle of the season like this. But I got some ideas as to maybe potentially why, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's kind of been the vibe so far from everybody that I've talked to, and so far.
I was Dario Melendez, who works does TV in Milwaukee and has been all over radio and is a friend of mine, and he and I got in this debate on Twitter on Saturday as they were getting demolished by Illinois. And he was saying, and a lot of people were agreeing with him, and I'm sure you saw this too, about how people are just, this is it, this program is getting worse. The Washington State game, fine, but two embarrassing losses. And when Bielema comes back to your house. And I thought like you, Dylan, there's no way Wisconsin's going to fire Paul Chryst, at least not during the regular season, not with his record, not with his bowl record, not with, the standard at Wisconsin isn't to win the Big Ten and go to the college football playoffs. It's to compete for the Big Ten title. So this floored me that people were actually on board. And when the news came down during the Packers game, it was like mind-blowing stuff.
It certainly was. I was kind of in the boat after the game on Saturday too, thinking that, well, if Wisconsin is going to make a change, it's going to be at the end of the year. There's no way with the track record that Paul Chryst has had, the success he's had with going on 7.5 years at Wisconsin. You would think that for somebody who's had the success he's had um, would be able to at least finish the season out. So I was definitely shocked by the news, like you said. But I think this was a statement made by athletic director Chris McIntosh.
His first
Um,
big move. Like this is it right here,
yep.
man. The program is funded by football. The athletic program, all the athletic programs are funded by football. And you just got rid of a guy who had a higher winning percentage than King Barry.
Yep, and fell one win behind Brett Bielema for second all time on Wisconsin uh, head coaching victories. But listening to Chris McIntosh Sunday night, he made it pretty clear that the football program wasn't where that he really wanted it to be right now. He sees Wisconsin as a national brand, a place that can compete,
Do you
not
see
just for.
Wisconsin as a national brand?
I think when you separate all the college football programs, I don't know how you can't include Wisconsin. I think especially over the last 25 years with the multiple Rose Bowl appearances. When you think of the Rose Bowl, you think of obviously USC, you think of Ohio State, but then there's people out there who do think about Wisconsin. They've went 3 years in a row at one point, one in 2020 as well. So there isn't a whole lot of college football programs that have been to that many Rose Bowl appearances over the last 20 years. They're not the same brand as Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Clemson, or even Georgia. But I think when you think of who like the top brands are within college football, I don't know how you don't have Wisconsin at least in that conversation as well.
I think it's an incredible statement from athletic director McIntosh and the university because they're not, in my mind, they're not a national brand. They're very much a regional brand who can pluck out 3 stars from Florida and develop them. And it's an incredible accomplishment to do that the way that Chryst and Bielema before him and Barry before him have been able to sustain the amount of success that they had. They don't get 5 stars. They don't get a lot of 4 stars. Wisconsin is not a hotbed of high school football. So I think it's an incredible statement by the university to say just competing for the Western title in the Big Ten, that's not good enough anymore. which is surprising because this has been the standard at Wisconsin since I've been alive. I mean, even when there was no, division and they were part of the Little 10 or the Little 8, I should say. Like this sets Wisconsin now has to be really, really good this next hire, whoever it is, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it. Like McIntosh is trying to push Wisconsin into the conversation with the schools you're mentioning, the Ohio States, Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, USC, Michigan, all those big dogs that recruit nationally. He's saying, no, we're part of that group because of the last 25 years that we've had.
Yeah, and the college football landscape over the last 15 years has just changed in general. I mean, you remember it, when you would win 8, 9 games and you made it. I know for me when I was younger, hey, if Wisconsin won 8 or 9 games and they got to play a bowl game on New Year's Day, that was it. Like that was a really good successful season. But now I think with the installation of the college football playoff, now that the playoff is going to be expanding in the next couple of years, and I think the impact of name, image, and likeness as well. I think you got to be more competitive, and I think you have to, essentially, if you're a brand like Wisconsin, you have to decide. Are we going to settle for just contending, or do we want to be with the best of the best? And so I think this is a statement that McIntosh made Sunday night.
What does Wisconsin do NIL wise?
I'm not really well versed in what Wisconsin does overall for NIL. I know that there are alumni. I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are um, former athletes, former student athletes who kind of have their hands kind of in the NIL with the players.
But they're not competing, and that's one of the things, the drawbacks at Wisconsin. You don't have NIL money like Ohio State, like Alabama. Harbaugh complained, and Harbaugh got himself more NIL money in Ann Arbor. USC and UCLA are on the way in. They got all that Los Angeles NIL money. Like, that's something that really holds Wisconsin back, and I'm sure that this is part of the conversation. Feels like Paul Chryst was more of an old school, kind of like Dabo Swinney, doesn't do a lot of NIL, doesn't do a lot of the transfer portal stuff at Clemson. It feels like Chryst is still stuck in that way, and the next guy has to push NIL, has to get boosters involved, has to get rich alums involved. It feels like that has to happen.
I think you're exactly right. I obviously I don't know, Paul Chryst, I don't know him, personally or anything like that. But part of it too is, maybe he is just the X's and O's guys. Maybe with what NIL has become now, and that you got to think about that as a head coach. Even Ryan Day at Ohio State said, "Hey, it's gonna cost us like $13 million just to keep these players on our team." And a lot of times, there's going to be players that follow the money. There's been people who have said, "Hey, I'm going to transfer from this program to this program because I can get more NIL money." So I think just with that too, maybe it was something that he wasn't really a part of, and who knows, maybe McIntosh. And I think at the end of the day, it's McIntosh looking down the road in the future, like 5 years from now. Can we see where college football is going? Do we have the right leader with us right now? And it seems to me that he made it sound like that they probably did.
College football is going one way, and it doesn't feel like Wisconsin's on that same path, and you can't compete. And like you said, the playoff is expanding. Well, that means there could be more opportunities for Big Ten teams to get in. That in most people's minds means either Michigan or Ohio State, and then Michigan or Ohio State, and maybe Penn State. But if you want that college playoff money, which is what this is all about, it's not about tradition, it's not about winning, it's about money.
Sure doesn't feel that way anymore.
And if you want that college football playoff money, if you want the Dr. Pepper halftime show to be involving your team, coming up in January, you got to get in that college football playoff. And here comes USC. And here comes UCLA, who's off to a great start. But here comes Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. And here comes, this feels like it was the right move, even though I'm blown away by it. Do you think it was the right move?
I think time's going to tell, but I think with the way the last year plus has gone, 13-10 in their last 23 games.
Yeah.
Obviously not a great start last year. Granted, it was a difficult schedule, but not a great start this year either. And I think you're right too. I think it ended up being the right decision, but it was still mind blowing and shocking at the same time that it happened when it did.
I think Paul Chryst was heralded as a quarterback guru, an offensive mind guru. I think honestly what did Paul Chryst in was his inability to develop Graham Mertz. Because Mertz, that first game, the 5-touchdown game, still living on that, never got better. Do you agree?
I think Saturday was a good example. The second interception he threw that you just, as a third year starter, fourth year player in the program, you don't make, that's not a decision you make. And who knows if that's on Chris or if that's on Mertz, but we can, the evidence shows that he's probably not where I think Wisconsin
No.
want him to be. And I wrote earlier this week, or even yesterday, I published an article saying that, we're going to find out how much of this offense is indeed Bobby Ingram's. We're going to find out how much, was Paul Chryst involved in this offense, and maybe Bobby Ingram was involved a lot. Maybe he wasn't involved with much. Maybe he had to run a pass Paul Chryst. But I think right now with the defensive-minded head coach and Jim Leonard, and not a lot of time to really adjust to what the offensive game plan is, I think the keys are going to be given to Bobby Ingram to see what he can do as a first-year offensive coordinator. And I think it's weird not letting Paul Chryst go, but I think at the end of the day, this is a new era, or it could be a new era of Wisconsin football, and that's got to be exciting too.
Another minute or two talking about Paul Chryst before we get to all the names, and obviously Jim Leonard's name is right there at the top of the thing. I thought Chryst was a boring but good hire when it happened almost a decade ago. I was on the air still in Milwaukee when it happened. It was like, really, Paul Chryst? What a boring hire. But it was a stable hire. Like, I had people complaining to me over the weekend, this program's in shambles. No, Nebraska's in shambles. That's
Yes.
what Scott Frost got fired because Nebraska, I mean, if you listed the top 10 wins of Scott Frost's career, you'd only have 8. Like, the program was a joke. Paul
Was there Nebraska players posting all over social media the love that they had for Scott Frost too, the way you saw Wisconsin
It's a good
players
point.
with Chris?
It's a really good point. What was the locker room like? What are the players saying about Chris getting canned?
I think they were all really shocked about it. I think, and as you should be too. You're losing your leader midway through the season. A lot of these guys, this was maybe their first college offer. Chris gave them an opportunity to play at the Division I level. Nick Herbig, Braylon Allen, those are just two names too that have said, this season is for you. I appreciate everything you've done. Braylon Allen tweeted, Sunday night, if you were rooting for Coach Chris firing, you're not a part of this team. So for anybody out there who is saying, and there's speculations that, maybe he lost the locker room, we can throw that off to the side. There's no way that he lost the locker room.
His offense just got outdated, and the offensive line wasn't great. Like, when Wisconsin is good, their offensive line is elite. The offensive line wasn't good. The offense wasn't very good. It has nothing to do with lost the locker room, I don't think. I just think it became archaic and old, kind of like what's going on in Iowa City with Kirk Ferentz in that offense. Like, that's still stuck
right,
like 15 years ago.
Yeah, and you can say the same thing of Iowa and Wisconsin. What does Wisconsin do really well right now? What are they used to? You always knew that you could hang your hat on defense
And run the ball.
and you could run the ball. They were never going to get out toughed. They're never going to get out physical, and you were going to have to beat them. They never beat themselves. Well, now you got 2 of your 3 losses where you got double-digit penalties. So that's not
They
Wisconsin.
can't run the ball.
And they can't. They're struggling to run the ball 2 yards, 2 yards Saturday. And
against Illinois, of all teams. Like, okay, go to Columbus and get blown out. Fine. But don't get beat by Illinois at Camp Randall by 100.
Exactly. And the defense is still young right now. I still think their defense is going to be okay. I think you got a lot of young guys. I believe it was 8 starters they had to replace from last year anyways. So I don't really think about this more as like a defensive problem right now, but I think there's just some stuff that they got to get figured out on the offensive side of the ball. And, I hope this is kind of the spark they need.
Dylan, let's get to Jim Leonard here. And, I see everybody loving Jim Leonard, one of the all-time greats at Wisconsin, turned down the Packer job. The statements he's made, he came back here, he wants to improve the program. But then you will have detractors, and I pointed this out too. His current track record doesn't look all that good. The 2022 defense sucks. and he's the guy in charge of the 2022 defense. Do you wipe that away and say, well, look at the previous years, or is that part of the conversation when it comes to replacing Chryst with Leonard?
I don't know if I would say wipe out. The defense, like I mentioned a little bit ago, isn't where it needs to be right now. It's not the Jim Leonard way right now. But you are replacing 8 starters. I do think they have a really good defensive line. I think they can get pressure. You got 2 inside linebackers who are brand new starters. You got Herbig. Herbig's still a monster. I like Guts on the other side too. He's flying. He doesn't really get the sacks and the accolades and the attention that Herbig gets, but you see him constantly all over the field too. And I like Holman, the redshirt freshman corner. He's cornerback 1 right now, I think. Really like Wooler at safety. However, unfortunately, he got injured the first week of the season. We haven't really seen him, so I think there's still some things that the defense still has to work out. But I think they're going to get it figured out. And I think moving forward, this is still going to be another solid defense. I really like Jim Leonard. I think not only he's one of the best, defensive coordinators in the country, he could be one of the best overall coaches in the country too. And I think he's got a track record over the last 5-6 years to back that up consistently in the top 10, even top 5 in overall defense in the country. And it was interesting during the Ohio State game. They're talking about, going to Columbus. A lot of these guys, going on the road for the first time, big time atmosphere, 100,000 people. It was Jim Leonard that week who was saying, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that this is another game, but it's not. It's not just a regular or just an ordinary game.
Yeah.
Like he was the one out there. He was the one, talking to the media, kind of getting that rah rah and fired up. And that's why right now I don't think about them. I don't think the potential of not responding to him isn't going to be an issue. I think they will, because anytime your coach gets fired, as a player, you do feel responsible, or at least partially responsible for, what could I have done? What could we have done better?
Yeah.
So, and if you think about it too, this Big Ten West is still wide open.
Yeah, everybody
sucks. I know it's crazy.
Everybody sucks in the Big Ten West.
I know it's crazy to say right now because Wisconsin's the only team that hasn't won in the Big Ten West. But, obviously Wisconsin isn't, scaring anybody right now. But who should we be scared of right now?
Nobody. Iowa sucks. Minnesota sucks. Everybody sucks in the West right now.
Right. Or who would you say right now is the best, probably right now the best team in the Big Ten West? Who would you say?
I mean, talent-wise, because I know the quarterback and the running back, I would probably go Wisconsin or Iowa. And Iowa because of their defense, only because of their defense. And Ferentz, Kirk Ferentz, not Brian Ferentz. But if I had to bet your massive paycheck from Wisconsin Sports Heroics, Dylan, I might throw it on Wisconsin, but I wouldn't feel good about it. I mean, you could take the whole Big Ten West, plop it in a Wisconsin helmet, pull one name out, and that's probably going to be good.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. And if Wisconsin plays to the talent that they're capable of playing, they could still go to Indianapolis.
Where's the Wisconsin Iowa game this year? Is that in
Kinnick?
It's at Kinnick. Okay.
Yep.
Because I'm looking at the rest of the schedule now on my phone. Northwestern, I'm real interested to see how they respond against Northwestern.
Mm-hmm.
Sparty and East Lansing. That's a nasty game.
Nasty game, but Michigan State hasn't been all that impressive.
Boy, they're really regretting their $90 million contract for their head coach. Purdue is good. Purdue's 3-2 is good. That's a camp right now.
I think your team right now in the Big Ten West to beat right now is Purdue.
Okay, that's fair. I'd agree with that. Then they've got Maryland at home. Then they go to Kinnick. Then they go to Nebraska, and who the hell knows what's going to happen there. And then the Axe game is at Camp Randall this year. I mean, I can see 4 wins there. I can see 4 wins. I can also see 4 losses.
Yep, I wouldn't sleep on Maryland. I think Maryland.
No, Howard Tua's brother.
I think Maryland. And them being in the Big Ten West, I think they'll give Wisconsin all they can handle at Camp Randall. But everyone kept saying it's Minnesota, but they lay an egg.
Yeah, you ever trust that head coach? No, I don't trust that head coach over there. He's a charlatan. So back to Jim Leonard real quick, because I know that the Wisconsin faithful, the alum, the boosters, they love him. He's an all-time legend. He's a great. I mentioned all the things he has said. Do you think kids care about Jim Leonhard in 2022, 2023? Do you think recruits care about Jim Leonhard?
I think on the defensive side of the ball, absolutely. I think, a lot of these players go to Wisconsin because they do see a head coach who had no offers, walked on at Wisconsin, became a Wisconsin legend, had I believe it was like a 10-year career in the NFL, and I was a successful coach. So I think on the defensive side, I'm not really worried about the recruiting area as much, but I do think you bring up a good point on the offensive side of the ball. And we're gonna find out, how if Jim Leonhard does have kind of a handprint on this offense as it gets near to the end of the year. I think right now, maybe not so much. He's just gonna adjust it to a new role. But I think if they can come out, if Wisconsin can come out and play the style of football that they're capable of playing, that these commits or ones who are seriously considering Wisconsin, if they can go out and play with that fire and with that passion and what they're capable of playing, I don't really see that being an issue even on the offensive side for recruiting either.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously the leader in the clubhouse. Back to your massive Wisconsin Sports Heroics paycheck that our guy Robin is throwing you with all your articles that you write about the Badgers. Percentage-wise, what do you think Leonhard has to keep the job? 50% shot, 70% shot, more?
I think right now, and it's interesting, the previous podcast I was on a couple of days ago, we talked about, does he have to have a certain record moving forward to keep this job, or do we need to see improvement? And I was on the side of saying that we need to see improvement. We need to see the offensive side of the ball especially cleaned up. I think it's hard to put a number out there for a coach who is on a trial. It's a trial head coach run.
7 games, Dylan. What does he got to win to keep his job?
If I had to say to keep the job, I think it's tough because I don't look at it from much of a record perspective, but I'd say 5-2.
So four wins in your mind is not good enough for Jim Leonhard to keep the job. The search is open.
I think if they win 4, I think if they go 4-3, but they're showing consistent improvement, I think they do. I've been just seeing some beat writers and ones who are in the media so close to the Wisconsin situation. It seems like Wisconsin wants Leonhard to take this job.
It really does.
And I don't know if it's going to come down to, do they tell Leonhard, hey, at the end of the season, do you want this or not? But I think they want him. It sounds like they want him, and they'd be shocked if he didn't get it. But obviously, he has to go out and earn it. But I think 5-2 might be much. 4-3 could be as well too.
Okay.
It's kind of tough, but I think as long as there's improvement in that offense side of the ball gets cleaned up, I think it's his to lose right now.
All right, I want to get to who I think is the other front runner coming up in a second, but I got to give a shout out to my friends at Great Lakes Dragaway. They help fund the podcast. Maybe you've heard the phrase, I feel the need for speed. It's come back, of course, this summer with that big old movie. Well, Great Lakes Dragaway in Union Grove, Wisconsin, the fastest quarter mile in the Midwest. If you're a gearhead, love to drive really fast, or just enjoy sitting back and watching these machines tear down the track, then you're in luck. My guys at Great Lakes Dragaway have exactly what you need. It's great family fun. I've been business partners with the guys at Great Lakes Dragaway for a decade, and they have been so good to me, and we appreciate that. They've got nights for bikes, hot rods, trucks, nitrous nights, and more. You can check out the entire schedule, greatlakesdragaway.com. All right, so we are about 5 weeks into the college football season. We got a few more weeks until the snow flies. Great Lakes Dragaway is open until the snow flies. Online, greatlakesdragaway.com. And one more thing, I know that, it's not even Halloween yet, but Christmas will be here before you know it. Make sure you get that gift card for the gearhead, for the racing fan on your list. greatlakesdragaway.com. That's greatlakesdragaway.com. All right, back to Dylan Buboltz from Wisconsin Sports Heroics. Dylan, Leonhard, I think, he's the front runner. He's the minus 270 leader right now. But the other guy everybody's talking about is our guy Lance Leipold. He's having such a run at Kansas. They're undefeated. They're in the national spotlight. They just beat Iowa State. They're 5-0. Do you think that with his connections at Whitewater and all the championships he won, he's a Wisconsinite, do you think that they did this to get ahead possibly of Nebraska or anybody else should Lance want to leave Kansas?
So I think right now, let's say Leonard doesn't get the job and Wisconsin wants Lance Leipold. I think he takes it if he gets offered it. He's also somebody that I thought about too. It's hard not to think about Leipold either. The success, like you said, at Wisconsin Whitewater, the Wisconsin ties. He would just kind of fit that Wisconsin mold. Greg Gard, Bo Ryan,
Yeah.
Paul Chryst.
Yeah, they're all kind of the same person.
That. Exactly. So it's hard not to consider him. And I mean, even just besides that, 5-0 with Kansas right now, it's pretty damn impressive right now.
Yeah. Not too many people have the success he had at the D3 level. Not too many people go to Buffalo and win division titles and go to a couple of straight bowl games. Like, that doesn't happen at Buffalo. It doesn't happen anywhere in the MAC. I don't know. I think for Lance, and Lance is a friend of mine, and he and I were texting the other night after the win over Iowa State, and I said, my wife, who went to Iowa State, my wife's not happy with you. But I wonder what the number would be. I don't know what his salary. I can look this up. I don't know what his salary is at KU, but I'm looking at the buyout number for Paul Chryst. I'm looking at the Big Ten Network deal coming in, where every school is going to get $85 million. It doesn't feel like the number matters. $2 million, $4 million, $8 million, whatever it is. If that's the guy they want, or if Leonard's the guy they want, Wisconsin has the money to compete with everybody else in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the Big Ten deal coming in, that's going to really help bringing in, UCLA and USC. You're going to see a lot of Fox Noon kickoffs. They love, they like going over there too. They'll get the opportunity to cover, at least one of the blue bloods of college football with USC. But yeah, I don't necessarily know what the dollars it would take for Leipold to potentially get to Wisconsin. But I think he's definitely somebody that if Jim Leonard doesn't want the job or doesn't get it for some reason, I think Wisconsin, putting the state ties aside, it's definitely somebody you got to consider.
Do you think Leonard stays on as defensive coordinator if, let's say, they hire someone else?
I think
for example, they hire Leipold and they ask Jim to stay on. Jim's the offensive guy. I'm sorry, Lance is the offensive guy. Jim's the defensive guy.
It would depend too if Jim Leonard didn't want the job or Wisconsin. If Jim Leonard didn't want it or Wisconsin didn't offer it to him, I think Leonard's also made it really clear that his family loves Madison. I mean, that's a big reason why he didn't take the Green Bay Packer defense coordinator job.
Mm-hmm.
Madison's everything to him. But I just think that if you aren't even offered the job, but told, hey, but we don't want to give it to you, but you can stay on if you want, I don't know how many coaches have been okay with that. I mean, but I could be wrong. But if Jim Leonard doesn't want the job and says, hey, can I be the defense coordinator instead? I think what you run into is when you bring in a guy or a new head coach, they like to bring in their own guys. So it would probably have to take Wisconsin and tell Leipold or whoever would get it, if you want the job, it's yours, but you have to keep Jim Leonard on staff. And I don't think that's the end of the world. He's only one of the best defense coordinators in the country. I think you'd at least consider it.
I think Lance has kept most of his staff from Whitewater to Buffalo to Kansas. I think I read that. Like 13 coaches have followed him around the country. I think the biggest drawback for Leipold is he's 58. If you're talking about 5 years, 10 years in this new college football world, does a 58-year-old guy versus Leonard, who's in his early mid 40s, I think. I don't know how old Jim Leonard is. Can't be much older than me, and I'm 41. 58 though, getting the job for the first time, that's the only red flag I see on Lance, and I love him. I was having this conversation with Doug Russell, my old partner, years ago when Lance came in studio, and I was like, man, this guy would be great. you don't make the jump from Whitewater to Wisconsin all that often, but go somewhere and come back. And he said, yeah, dude, but he's 52 at that point. So the timing just might not be right for Lance Leipold based on his age and only based on his age.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's I at the same time, if you can coach, you can coach, but age could potentially be a factor in that as well. There always just seems to be a next slew of young coaches in the college level that are ready to make the jump up to the Power 5 level and all that. And I've also heard names around too, such as Bill O'Brien, or I think Bill O'Brien may have had the second highest odds after Jim Leonard. I
He
think when I
doesn't seem like he
saw it
was
on
a
Sunday
good
night,
college coach. He was not a
he
bad
was.
coach. Yeah, he was just a terrible NFL coach, but he was a good college coach.
Yeah, and you can be a good, yeah, and you can be one or the other. You can be a good college coach, not a great NFL coach. So there's always that. And then I did also see, Dave Aranda. I don't really see that. I mean, he left. So I don't really know about that, but I think at the end it's Leonard's job to lose. But I also agree with Leipold that he should definitely be higher up there too.
I think if Aranda moves from the head, and this kind of goes back to what we're going to end, I think, pretty soon here on this. Dave Aranda going from Baylor to Wisconsin is a horizontal move. And Baylor in the Big 12 right now ain't Texas and Oklahoma. And I know they're on their way to the SEC, but that's a horizontal move for Dave Aranda. And that goes back to what we talked about at the start. As Chris McIntosh wants Wisconsin to be in the Texas-Oklahoma level, the Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State level. That's where he wants them to be. I don't know if Aranda makes that move. The only thing I would say that, okay, maybe he wants out is the Big 12 is going to dissolve soon. So there's not going to be much of a Big 12 left for him to be the big dog.
Yeah, and what he's done too at Baylor over the last couple of years too is pretty remarkable too. But I agree with you. I don't see it. I don't really see where it fits.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
it's definitely going to be something to. It's going to be a very entertaining winter and spring, that's for sure. Because I would assume after the season's done, Wisconsin's going to want to make that decision pretty quick. I think they're going to go into spring ball with their guy.
Final guess: is it going to be Jim Leonard? Will it be Lance Leipold? Is it going to be Matt Campbell at Iowa State? Is it going to be Aranda? Is it going to be Bill O'Brien? Dylan Buboltz, that big paycheck from Wisconsin Sports Heroics. Who's going to be the head coach Game 1 next year for the Badgers?
I think it's going to be Jim Leonard.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm
kind of
okay with
easy
that.
way out, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm all right with that. Follow him on Twitter at Dylan Buboltz. Dylan, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. I know we went long. But this is a conversation that on Saturday I'm like, we have to have this conversation, and I thank you for being a part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. You got it anytime.
Wisconsin Sports Heroics, wisportsheroics.com. Like, rate, share the podcast with your friends, especially if you know a Badger fan who would appreciate this conversation. Thanks for checking out Wickett on Wisconsin. My name is Mike Wickett. As always, go Pack Go, go Bucks, go Brewers, and on Wisconsin.